Get on the ground. Get on the ground.
Give me your gun, I need.
Thousands of protesters gathered to show their anger towards the police. Peaceful and kneel down in protest. Clearly sending a message that they want justice and not conflict. It was on March 23rd when Daniel Pruitt, a 41-year-old black man, was undergoing a mental health crisis. His brother called 911 for assistance. The police arrived to find him unarmed and naked on the streets of Rochester. After he claimed to be COVID positive, his head was immediately covered with spit hood. He was then pinned to the ground, and an officer put his knee on his neck that led to his asphyxiation. After months of the incident, Pruitt's family got access to the videotape and they saw the violence done to Daniel. They released the tape to the public on Wednesday, September 2nd. Rochester's population has responded in support against police brutality. The protest has taken over the city. Initially, the protest was a dance party on the streets. It was completely peaceful.
Which side are you on, my people? Which side are you on?
The protest has been slowly growing in size. The epicenter was becoming a public safety building. But Friday onwards, the police decided to fire flash bombs and pepper spray. Public demanded for the mayor's resignation along with the cop's arrest. A jury has been assigned to the state attorney. In today's protest, the police have been reined in. Even though a local police officer told us that there were 500 police officers called in from surrounding areas. The people of Rochester are demanding for the resignation of all the accused senior officers, including the mayor and the police chief, an immediate arrest and fast court for the police officers who they say were criminals rather than a police force. The basic agenda behind this movement is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities. Black lives cannot simply be targeted for demise. It's been hundreds of years of exploitation. The concept has to be very clear that this is not just a moment, but it's a movement for Black Lives Matter, and justice must prevail. May 25th, the killing of George Floyd in police custody is a constant reminder of hundreds of years of racial inequality, brutality, and injustice. The fight for the lives of black people can only be won by combating and countering acts of violence, centering black joy, creating space for black imagination and innovation, and most importantly, by providing justice to the lives lost due to human rights violation. New Delhi Bureau, Democracy News Live.
Just even looking at those, videos from across the United States of policemen jumping on black, mostly men, literally killing some of them. One begins to wonder what is going on in the United States. The US has talked about, the moral high ground of being a just society. They literally caught Saddam Hussein in Iraq and took him to the gallows for his human rights violations. They went to The Hague, got, the War Crimes Tribunal to make sure that Saddam Hussein goes to the gallows. I don't know who would be sent to the gallows for crimes against humanity when we see this in the United States. Will it be Donald Trump to be tried at The Hague? This is certainly very brutal. If Saddam Hussein was killed and hanged for sending over 150 people of the Kurds because of a chemical weapon that he used, there are many more that have been killed on the streets in the United States. And white supremacists, and especially many of the people in the Republican side, and especially led by Donald Trump, probably need to be, pinpointed as people who are certainly getting involved in this. So I think time for us to understand, is all of the United States a racist society? We got to take a closer look at it. Generalizations are easy. So we decided to reach out to a whole panel in Rochester where the whole chaos is unfolding right now. But you will be surprised to know there are many thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Rochester, a lot of them in the white community, who are standing up. Now, we've decided to bring in an all-white panel today because we've heard many a times from, the black population. They've talked about what they're going through, but here are a lot of white people who are standing up and saying, I'm sorry, this is not how it needs to unfold in the United States. We're going to start with uh, the editor of Transcontinental Times. It's a partner organization. She's based in Rochester. Lisa, welcome to the show. Tell us first, what have you been seeing in the last few days there?
The protests that I attended, the first one was on Thursday evening, and it was a dance party in the street. So many people had gathered, probably a few hundred, and in that they were having a lovely dance party, and there was just a very peaceful gathering. And then on Saturday night I attended, and it was completely different. So we all gathered, and at the very beginning of the protest, people gathered together, and there was a benediction given over the crowd. There was song, and there was a reminder of what we're there for. And we did meditation together as a group, and it was absolutely beautiful. And from there, we marched very peacefully, chanting, singing, until we reached the place where the police had set up a blockade. We were on our way to the public safety building. And when we reached the police blockade, they told us that it was an unlawful gathering and asked us to disperse, and the crowd did not. And so very soon after they asked us to disperse, we ended up getting fired on with pepper spray. They were firing pepper bullets into the crowd.
So while all of it started really in a non-violent fashion, and people were just marching
Yes,
towards this public safety building, as I
yes,
hear, that's becoming the
yes,
epicenter. But the police decided
yes,
to, blockade your access towards the public safety building. It was a completely
that's correct.
non-violent, peaceful march. The police came with pepper spray, came with fire bombs, came with, dogs, and continued to
Yes,
threaten people.
yes.
Can, why do you ever think why this is happening? Why aren't they taking a moral high ground and saying people will protest? We have done something extremely wrong. These are criminals. These are not police officers. These guys should be hanged and sent to to the gallows rather than even a smaller punishment. Why is the police force protecting their own by stopping people from marching?
Well, I think that that's actually the question that people are asking. And certainly I can't answer that. I can't speak to the intentions of the administration. I don't know what they're thinking. It would seem appropriate that they would be allowing the protesters to protest peacefully. And I suppose that from their perspective, that they're trying to protect the building, the public safety building. However, last night they were able to do that. They had barricades up, and the protesters pushed up against the barricade. To my knowledge, I was there until nearly 1 a.m, and no one had tried to push past the barrier at all.
Sure. Joining us is Tali Beckwith-Cohen. She's a student. She's an actor, writer. She's an activist living in Rochester, New York. She's a senior creative writing major at the School of Arts. Now, Tali, you've been very involved in this whole protest. Explain to us, you're a 17-year-old. How important is it for people in your generation to stand up and show to the administration that what they've done is extremely wrong and this is going to be unacceptable?
I think it's vital. We are in the middle of a chaotic time, and I think it's more important now than ever that we show up, that we continue to show support for the women of color and people of color who are organizing these marches and organizing these protests. I think it's so vital that we keep the pressure on. We have to keep pressure on our administration, on our institutions to make meaningful change.
When I was talking to you yesterday, I was reminded of the Nazis in Germany. The Nazis in Germany, as they acted on the Jewish people, there was a tremendous push by the Nazis. They killed many, many Jewish people in concentration camps. One of the things people always talk about is the German population didn't stand up against the dictatorial regime that the Nazis offered, the white supremacy that the Nazis offered. And I think for people like you to come up and stand, it kind of shows the morality of the society. There may be a group of people who may be white supremacists and may feel that they need to subjugate the black population, but then there are a lot of people such as yourselves. Now, when you look around your school, when you look around, people in your age group, overall, do you feel they are more progressive, or do you still see major racism?
So I go to school in the city, and my school population is majority Black and brown students. So I, as a white student, am the minority. And I think Rochester is a very sort of progressive liberal bubble that I live in. So most of the people I encounter in my day-to-day life would have very similar political beliefs, very similar ideas of social justice. But I know that that's not the case in most communities. I live in my own kind of little liberal bubble in my own school where, it's very diverse. We have a lot of, and we have a lot of people who would support defunding the police, support meaningful change, support Black Lives Matter movement. So in Rochester, it's pretty progressive, but I know that around the rest of the country, around even surrounding communities, once you get into the suburbs, into the rural area, that is not the case.
Please tell me what's outside the bubble then.
So, yeah, in the city, we are very diverse. And then once you get out into the suburbs, immediately surrounding our city, the population becomes much more white. The incomes go way up. And I think that there's a disconnect between what is happening in our city and what is happening to Black and brown people in our city, and people who in their suburban life, where they're around mostly white people, mostly wealthy people, I don't think they quite understand what's going on, understand the depth of what's going on. And I think when they hear like radical terms like defund the police, it scares them off. Right? We're challenged. This country is so built on systems of racism that I think when we challenge these systems of racism, when we challenge what our police force is, when we challenge our laws, our institutions, I think people feel like we're threatening America and get scared. So I think that's sort of what's going on. People are scared of change because, especially for white people, it's going to mean giving up maybe some of their privilege. But I think that's mostly what's going on is people are threatened by the kinds of changes that we need and that we're asking for.
No, the reality is that there is racism, and there's racism around the world. But in the United States, there's certainly been hundreds of years of racism. With the whole slavery, the Black communities have been suppressed over many, many years. And the change has been coming all the way from when Martin Luther King started and the uprising, and change has been slow, but it's been coming. I think this is one more step going towards fighting the racism that still exists. And with this last Republican government, we've seen white supremacist groups become even stronger because they were earlier suppressed, possibly under Democrats. And there was far more progressive Republican regimes, but this one certainly isn't. Now, I'm going to bring in a very interesting guest, Lara Provençal Capuano. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. I tried my best, Lara. Lara.
Well done.
Lara is a biological mother for 3 girls. Obviously, they're white, but she's adopted 2 Black young boys. And it kind of shows the progressive mindset that Lara comes from anyways. It talks about, she understood racism probably far before she even decided to adopt, and she'd seen it. Lara, tell me, how bad is racism in the United States, if you want to shed some light on it?
Yeah, I think that when we look from a historical context, it's easy to see some of the improvements. It's easy to see a reduction in some of those really overt racist kind of mindsets or behaviors or actions. The use of racial slurs is kind of like dissipated in a lot of ways, and some of these overt acts of violence have reduced. And so it's easy for white people to think, well, it's not like it was back in the civil rights movement. It's better now. And in some ways that is true. In other ways, things, are a little bit worse in some ways. And I think in part when we gauge how bad the racism problem is based on overt racism, and we don't address and uproot covert racist mindsets, those things linger. And without addressing systemic or institutional or organizational racism that's built into our systems, into our schools, our churches, our government, our law enforcement, all of our systems that hold power, if we don't address those things, they kind of grow roots, and the true problem, the heart issue that we all kind of have to face in ourselves, of racism, is still there. We're all a part of a racist system, a system that benefits white people and men, and primarily, and then can often disadvantage or harm people of color. And so when we see Black and brown folks suffering, and we want to compare it to back in the day and say it's better, in reality, what we're seeing is some of these more covert things and systemic things, which is why these protests are taking place and why they are intended to be disruptive. It's to make racism expensive, to make it inconvenient, and to kind of try to get to the place where we're uprooting these issues that really are deeply held heart issues that I think we have to uproot spiritually and systemically and politically in all the areas. But so I think it's pretty
Lara,
bad, frankly.
Lara, when you adopted your two Black children, what was the thought in your mind that you were going to adopt Black children?
It was not that we set out to adopt Black children necessarily. We were open to a child of any race and either gender. And we were told right away that if we were open to a child of any race, it would most likely be a fully African-American boy, because they said, and this is a direct quote, they said, they are the most difficult to place because people are afraid of what Black boys become, which is Black men. And they are viewed as aggressors, and they're viewed as potential criminals. And we saw that when we adopted our Black boys. We saw that response and that reaction. We got questions and concerns from people.
Wow, it's even when as you tell me, it's sometimes so difficult to stomach the idea that there'll be a preconceived notion about what the boys of Black race would become when people have this preconceived idea, and it's certainly it completely throws me off even when I hear it. Lisa, I want to come to you right now. I'm going to ask you, as you've seen these protests unfold, and you've seen a lot of the people push back, how is the administration responding? Do you think there'll be enough action?
Well, as far as action, I know that the organizers are demanding the resignation of the mayor. They're demanding the resignation of the chief of police. and obviously the arrest of the officers that were involved. And do I think that that's going to happen? I don't know, of course. However, the organizers are committed to remaining in the streets night after night after night until those demands are met.
Okay. Tali, if I may ask you, will you and your friends who are out there protesting, are you going to back down until you actually get action from the administration?
Absolutely not. We are in the streets until they meet our demands.
And what is,
Keep going.
how many days, how many weeks, how many months?
You know, only time will tell. I don't think this is going to be easy. The organizers keep saying this is a marathon; it's not a sprint. So but we have already seen some progress in about a week since we found out about the tragedy of Daniel Pruitt. The officers who were involved in his arrest and murder were suspended. They're suspended with pay, which is insane, but at least they are off our streets. And we've seen our attorney general has impaneled a grand jury and really started the process of this investigation. So we have seen change already, and it comes in incremental little bits, right? But so to answer your question, we will be in the streets fighting for as long as it takes. This is about people's lives. This is about it's really important that we stay out there and show that we're not going to give up.
Very, very important. Sometimes it's a long haul, but it's worth it because at the end of the day, in this case, the police, which was supposed to be the protector, has become the aggressor. And when they become the aggressor, we have to fight back because we are the one who empowered them. It's our money that they work on. It's our votes that get them to where they are. The politicians, we decide who they are. And the system should certainly work for the people and not against the people. Lara, I have a question for you. When your two boys go out, are you worried? Are you scared?
My older son is nearly 13 and he is starting to become a man. And so, it's easy to fetishize young Black children and think they're so adorable and almost exoticize them in the white community. But as they become young men, yes, I am very concerned. The view of young boys, as they kind of are up to no good, and boys will be boys, and there's sort of a grace that's extended to boys to kind of sow their wild oats or to be a little reckless. That's expected in our culture. We expect that of American boys, unless you're Black. And that grace is no longer expected or extended. And what's expected is violence and aggression. And there's a perception that they're intimidating. And so, I have a kind of a unique concern. My youngest son has hearing loss. So he has bilateral hearing loss, 2 hearing aids. And if his battery dies in that hearing aid, or there's a lot of ambient noise, he does not hear well. With hearing loss comes difficulty placing where a sound might be coming from, or if he can't read lips, he's really struggling to hear things clearly. And so I think of him growing up and hearing a command from a police officer to stop or to put his hands up, and him having hearing loss could be a death sentence for him. Wow. So I have real fears and concerns for them.
You have 3 girls. How do your girls kind of feel protective towards the boys? Because I know one girl's probably younger, but you have 2 older girls. How protective do they feel towards the brothers?
Oh, they are quite protective. They've loved these boys since infancy, and they have been like second and third mamas to my boys. And so for them, they feel highly protective. And what's interesting is because they're white, people don't necessarily filter around them. And so they have an unmitigated kind of access to racist mindsets because nobody knows, nobody necessarily assumes that they have Black family members. And so they will hear racist things said at school or in their friend group. And they have this unique opportunity and I would say, and even a stronger responsibility to address those things and share and educate their friends and call out racism when they see it. And so they feel very protective and they feel, I will be honest, they feel right now a little isolated amongst the kids around them. I think they're much more passionate. I'm so encouraged, Tali, by you to hear your passion at such a young age. Because I think my older girls share that and feel a little isolated in it. So kudos to all the younger folks.
And I'm meeting so many, and Lisa certainly has been following up on it. I've been meeting so many people, white people who have adopted Black children. It talks about the morality of a society. Easy to look at the United States and say, hey, racist country, everybody's racist. It's not true. There are a lot of good people out there trying to make sure that they can make a difference, they can get rid of racism. And that's the kind of society we need to function in. When you have a minority, you do not press on them and push on them. You make sure they get uplifted. And that's what the whole action towards, bringing up communities which are minorities and have been pushed for hundreds of years. That whole affirmative action is all around that. I'm going to get Tali to, make a few, closing statements and thoughts as we wrap up the show. Tali, would you like to add something to what's going on?
One thing I've been thinking kind of as we've been speaking that's important to distinguish is that the racist problems that we have in our country, I think we have as a country a tendency to talk about, there's a few bad racist people, or it's a few individuals or a lot of racist individuals. And while there are a lot of racist individuals, the bigger problem is that our country is entrenched in systemic racism, which means that even if we didn't have these individual racist people, our country would still be would still face discrimination, would still be oppressive because these systems are so entrenched. Right? This country was built on the backs of Black and brown people. Our systems are built on the backs of them. So I think that's an important detail to distinguish there is that, thank you. It isn't a few racist people. It isn't a racist leader. It is a system that oppresses Black and brown people. And when we talk about just individuals, I think that takes a little bit of the blame off of ourselves. So I think it's so important that we as white people examine our position in this system of racism, and not, pass that off as just a few people over there, just a few racist cops, because that's not the problem. And if we keep looking at it like that, we're not going to make a change.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Tali, you're making a very good point. The system, a large part of the system is racist, and it may involve us as well when we talk about the racism. And so I think it's a very important point you make. We can't blame just a few leaders or politicians or just a few cops around it. And so I think there needs to be some systemic changes that need to be brought about, and it may take a long time, but we have to start somewhere. Lara, closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would say that it is all of our responsibility to assess how we are complicit, how we benefit. And I think the solution is empathy and listening and finding common ground. And I think if we all viewed our responsibility, it to be our responsibility as white people. So for me, I come from a Christian worldview. So for me, I think the church is the solution. if teachers felt that education was the solution, and if law enforcement thought that reform, criminal justice reform, was the solution, if we were all coming from our sphere of influence to dismantle and tear down these racist systems and rebuild in a way that creates equity, inclusion, justice, I think that would lead to, just this sense of community and communion. And I think it starts with empathy and listening and just caring. I think we just need to care.
I hear you. I hear you, Lara. Lisa, you've been covering the protests. You obviously were talking to the police yesterday as well. And you were told about how more and more policemen were being brought in from around different communities to kind of push back on this protest. Explain to me, how do you see this going forward? Do we need to be more careful? Do you think there'll be violence?
Well, again, I can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's important that we continue to be on the streets, and I'm going to continue to be there to report it. And one thing that I want to add to echo what Lara said is that I think that for me as a white person, it's even more important to not be just not racist, but to be anti-racist. And for myself, I'm learning about what that means. I'm learning from my friends of color. I'm learning from conversations with other white people. And for me, I feel like that's something that within myself that I can work on. It's not just about not being a racist. It is about being anti-racist.
What an important point. We also have to remember that Rochester is the place where the Gandhi Institute of Peace is there. And Mahatma Gandhi had a very huge impact on Martin Luther King, who led this whole black struggle in the United States. Mahatma Gandhi never met Martin Luther King, but obviously they communicated, and it led to the first uprising where black people were able to get out of a lot of the slavery and were able to create a space for themselves. It's been an ongoing journey, but we've seen it's not been a smooth journey. Thank you very much, Lara, again for joining me. Thank you, Tali. Thank you, Lisa. I think it's a really, really important bit to kind of, continue fighting. And I think until and unless we all come together, and whatever community be, whatever minority there may be, as long as they're being suppressed, and there'll be people to stand by and push back on these governments or, groups of people who are trying to suppress them, we will win. Thank you for joining me. Good night and good luck.